Welcome, everyone, to the show. I appreciate that if you're listening to this on the podcast, know that there is a video version of this at jjflazanes.tv. I have the distinct honor today to have with me Gary Zukav. For those of you that don't know Gary, he's probably Oprah's most guested expert. I think it's 34 times that you've been on the Oprah Show. And Gary has been around for a long time. I know my first introduction was probably on the Oprah Show, and I have my very old version of Seat of the Soul that I got probably in 1989 or 1990 while I was living in New York City, and I have obviously had it ever since. And today, if you're watching us here on the video, know that you can take this podcast with you. There's a link below the video to take the show and continue listening as you go about your day. And there'll also be a more fleshed out intro about Gary and all his accolades. Those will come up during today's show, but I just wanted to let you know that there's more information at the front end when you listen to the audio podcast. So Gary, thank you so much for being a part of the show today.
You're welcome, JJ. It's a joy to be here.
It's an honor. I know you haven't done a lot of these yet, so I appreciate that I'm in the front end of getting you to be a guest on the show. And I really want to spread the messages that you've already been spreading. And I want to start off with, I've literally carried this book around with me since, again, I'm thinking 1990. And I lived in New York City, and then I moved to California. And I've watched several Oprah segments with you on it, even and especially the most recent one. I think it was the most recent one where she kind of made a funny when you talked about your sex addiction when you were younger. And she's like, oh, well, I can't imagine you being a sex addict. So I want to go back. I want to go back to why Seat of the Soul? What was your story to get you from where you were? You went to Harvard. I don't know what you studied at Harvard. What did you study at Harvard?
International relations.
International relations. How do we go from studying international relations, having certain addictions, being in the service, to writing the books that you've written and to being on the spiritual journey? So why don't you start wherever you're most comfortable to answer that question of what that pivot point was for you of awakening or consciousness or evolution, expansion, to know that there's so much more going on, and I'm really wanting to talk about that and teach that.
There is usually so much more going on. The difference now is that more and more people are aware of that, because there's a huge and unprecedented transformation of consciousness that's occurring now and has been occurring for several generations. And that expansion of consciousness is a movement beyond the limitations of the five senses. Like most people think that the universe, not just the world, but the universe is just what they can see and hear and touch and taste and smell. And they'll get on a spaceship sometime. And if we ever have intergalactic travel, which would make them hundreds of years old by the time they get to another galaxy, still when they get there, nothing would exist except what their five senses can show them. That's the old consciousness, mate. The old consciousness. There is a new consciousness that is emerging now. And I don't ask anyone on our podcast to believe me. In fact, I suggest that you don't believe me just because I'm saying something. And I suggest that you don't believe anybody just because they say it, even if they've had a television show or they've written books or they've got a pulpit. Try it on yourself. See if you resonate with it. And if it does, experiment with it. And if it doesn't, no, don't try to wear a shoe that pinches. So when I speak to you about the expansion of human awareness that's happening in hundreds of millions of individuals, I'm talking about something that's going on now. And if there's nothing in your experience that relates to this, then, well, consider it a myth and enjoy listening. However, if you've ever had the sense, if you're as old as I am, you might not have had the sense except for the last 3 or 4 generations. And if you are born in the last several generations, have you had the sense that you are more than a body and a mind? That you're more than muscles and molecules and enzymes, that you have an aspect of you that is bigger. What do I mean by bigger or more? I mean an aspect of you that existed before you were born and that will continue to exist after you die. And that is your soul. And there are billions of people who subscribe to a religious belief that incorporates that. But I don't know if all the billions of them, I'm talking about Hindus and Buddhists, and even Christians, because they talk about something called heaven and hell, which obviously there is a recognition there that there are things done and said during your lifetime that create consequences that go beyond your lifetime. So that's not as detailed an exploration of consciousness beyond death, but it's a pretty clear acknowledgement that there is. And so I'm talking about reincarnation. I'm talking about the soul and the journey of a soul multiple times through a learning environment. We'll call it the Earth School of time, space, matter, and duality. If you've ever had the feeling that there's more to you and there's more to the world, this podcast is for you. If you've had the feeling that the world is not just random, although it can appear that way and does to many people, but that it's meaningful in some ways. It's symbolic. And by that, I mean you can learn about yourself from it. Most people in the past, in the old consciousness, were concerned about learning about the world from the world. But now that we're becoming multisensory, that we have more senses than our five, they've discovered they can learn about themselves from the world. And if that's ever happened to you, if you've had the sense that it wasn't by accident that something just happened to you, and I don't mean that it's preordained or that you had no control over it, you've always got control over the decisions that you make and the intentions with which you act on those decisions. But if you've had that experience, you're becoming multisensory, or you are. If you've had the experience or the idea that seems real to you, that the universe is not cold, empty, merciless, endless space with a few bodies in it here and there, but that it's alive, it's wise, it's compassionate, then you are becoming multisensory. So these are the things you can check out for yourself. And the books that I've written or written with my spiritual partner, Linda Francis, will give you insights and, better than that, tools to experiment. The book I'd suggest is The Seat of the Soul, the very one that you recommended. And there's an anniversary edition of it now with a large study guide in the back that I wrote. I'd suggest you look at that. So I'm going to assume that as a listener or a viewer, you're drawn to this podcast because you feel that something big is happening in the world. In New Age circles or whatever circles you can identify as beyond culture as you've known it, there are so many buzzwords that are everywhere evident, like consciousness, like evolution, like conscious evolution. Those are all good words. And they buzz, they have vibrancy for a reason, because they're all pointing to something that's real. And that realness is the emergence of a new human species. The old human species doesn't have a future. And in fact, pursuing the understanding of power that's embedded in the old species leads only to violence and destruction. The old species, the old consciousness, considered power to be the ability to manipulate and control. And that was good medicine for us for a long time. Now it's poison, it's toxic. It prohibits our evolution. And the new understanding of power that is emerging along with multisensory perception, or in it, is power as the alignment of your personality with your soul. And if you want behavioral terms, your soul intends harmony, cooperation, sharing, and reverence for life. So as you align your personality with those intentions, you put yourself on the spiritual path. And in my experience, this is not easy. And in fact, everything I've known about spiritual paths since humans have been thinking about such a thing, and through all of our organized religions, everyone can tell you it's not easy. And why is it not easy? Well, as multisensory humans, we can provide an answer that's relevant in meaningful ways. It's not easy because fear is difficult to experience. What do I mean by fear? Jealousy, anger, resentment, vengeance, superiority and entitlement, inferiority and needing to please, and every obsession. For example, I've got to have him, I've got to have her as a partner, or I've got to be a millionaire by the time I'm 32 or maybe 26. And the thought keeps coming to you and you can't get rid of it. That is an obsessive thought. That is an expression, an experience of fear. And every compulsion, like a perfectionism. Do you have to have your desk cleaned and ready to go before you can really get down to work? Do you have to have the linen closet stacked and folded just right? That's a compulsion. And the classic one is not wanting to step on cracks on the sidewalk. Whatever it is, those are compulsions, and they are experiences of fear. And every addiction is an experience of fear.
Can we talk about, Gary, because as you led into today with the idea of consciousness and whether or not it fits and feels right for the person listening. And of course, I'll tell you that the majority of people who are listening to me are in alignment with that, because especially with my show, Spirit, Purpose, and Energy, it's kind of what we talk about and a lot. And so that doesn't mean that everyone who's clicking on this now who doesn't know me is going to be in alignment with that. So I appreciate the disclaimer at the top of the show here. I want to go back to that place where before you were more conscious or awake, what happened to get you from where you were to the state of wanting to write a book called Seed of the Soul, wanting to look at life differently? Was there an incident that happened, or was it just slowly over time that you started to see life differently?
There were lots of incidents, and they happened over time.
Okay.
And in answer to your question, how does one get from addiction to sex? I rode motorcycles. I experimented with drugs, almost every drug I could think of then, except those that I sensed were not for me. Heroin, very heavy drugs. But everything else, I was experimenting. And why was I experimenting, and why was I an addict? Fear. Fear translates into something very recognizable: pain, emotional pain. And emotional pain, as you really become aware of it, and you will now as you're multisensory, you can begin to experience it in terms of specific physical sensations in your body. And when you can do that, now you're really on the spiritual path. That's emotional awareness. A real solid, usable emotional awareness. So I was not aware. I was in fear, which means I was in pain. And everybody with an addiction is, whether it's sex like mine was, or alcohol, or drugs, or shopping, or gambling, or eating, or pornography. Those experiences offer you a respite from the pain, but not much, because you satisfy that craving, that addictive need, and the pain's back, and so is the craving. So that's where I was. I was at Harvard, and I graduated a little late because I wanted to go to Mississippi to work with the NAACP. And then when I got back, after I graduated, I went into the Army, and I was a Special Forces officer. I'm sure, the only person at Harvard that had posters of paratroopers on the way down in his sleeping room. And that's what I did. And the power of intention is enormous. If we have time before the end of the show, I can use an example from the Army to show you how strong the power of intention is. But none of this changed. While I was in the Army, I was still an addict. I was still judgmental. I was angry with everyone. I judged everyone except people who were like me. They were okay, and I approved of them. If that sounds familiar, that's because you have frightened parts of your personality that do that. And then I was invited to a meeting of physicists at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory. I was living in the city, San Francisco, on Telegraph Hill. And I went to see what physicists looked like and sounded like. And to my amazement, this group was discussing the question, are we creating the reality that we're experimenting with? Now, I talked about that in coffee shops in North Beach, but these were world-renowned physicists, and they weren't just making idle talk. They were making a genuine inquiry, and that inquiry comes straight out of the heart of quantum mechanics. So I was so stimulated. I had sparks just like this coming off my fingertips, like I had 3 cups of cappuccino that I shouldn't have had at the same time. But I could not tell anybody what was exciting me. I could not articulate it. Only the excitement was there. So I asked if I could return to the meeting. And they all said yes. There were about 11 or 12 of them. And the beautiful woman who created it, Elizabeth Rauscher, she called it the Fundamental Physics Group. And she spelled it FYSICS. They all just a funny way, because that's how she was. And I decided to write a book about what I was learning. And I asked them if they'd help me. And every one of those physicists except one said yes. And they only asked 3 things, one thing of me: get it right. Get it factually right, get it historically right, get it conceptually right. And so as I was typing the chapters, I would send them to these physicists, and often they would send me back on the flip side of the page more than I sent them. And I used their notes to make the book better, to hone it, to make it clearer. And while I was writing that book, something interesting happened. I didn't discover it. I knew it before, but I didn't know what to call it. Non-physical reality. And here's how it happened while I was writing the book. I would make an outline for every one of its chapters. And then I would sit down to write. And the outline became uninteresting to me because the energy would go somewhere else. And I'd follow the energy. And after a while, the chapter would come to a close. And I never experienced a chapter coming to a close. It just does. And it's done. Or I could type past the close and everything would start to dissolve and go wrong, until I realized the chapter ended back there 6 paragraphs ago. And I ended there and everything's okay again. So in the midst of that, I noticed that all of these chapters were beginning to fit together as though I had planned them. But I didn't. I threw my plans away. Those were the outlines. So how was that happening? And that's when I realized this book has a life of its own. I'm not creating it. And I'm not channeling it. This is work. I have to think, I have to read, I have to research, I have to bring all of my writing skills to bear. And how did I get so many writing skills? And how did I get so good at it? That's when I first began to realize there's nothing I learned anywhere in this lifetime to prepare me for that. I must have been a scribe or a monk pouring over language. But monks, I don't think, were just pouring over language someone gave them. This is something else. This is poetry. This is authorship, not penmanship or writing. So I said, I'm going to give myself to whatever is happening because it's good. And I did. And 18 months later, The Dancing Woolly Masters, the book I was writing, was done. And it immediately, the day that it was published, it got a rave review in the New York Times, a huge review, 2/3 of a page, the old kind of newspaper pages. And that was the first book I'd ever written. But there were several firsts to that. First time I had ever been interested in physics, but more importantly, it was the first time I ever gave a gift to life. Before then, everything was for me. The sex, the motorcycles, the monthly miracle of the rent and trying to get it. Everything for me, for me, for me. But I knew from the very beginning, as I was writing this book and had the thought of writing it, that I would not be involved in physics indefinitely. And I wanted to share what I was learning with others like me who were liberal arts majors, who didn't care or know about mathematics or even science. And I wanted to offer them this excitement, this scintillating, powerful set of concepts on a silver platter so they could have a feast like I was having. I never felt like that before, JJ. Before then, it was all for me. This was for other people. And that was a huge gift. And it was part of one of the incidents I told you, I mentioned, that happened while I was writing The Dancing Ruling Masters, an overview of the new physics. And then I got a pretty big head, but I wasn't inflated the way some people are, like I think I'm big. It was inverted. No, not me. Really, I'm nothing. I was nothing. But I did have a big head, real big. And 10 years later, I wrote The Seat of the Soul. I'd started out to write a trilogy called Physics and Consciousness, but it turned into a book about evolution and the soul and reincarnation. And so I followed the energy again, and that was my second book. And all along the way, I've been having experiences of multisensory perception. So in case some of the people who are listening are not authors, but there may be many, or there may be many poets or painters, or anyone who's inspired in what they do, whether it's raising a child or creating a business or a podcast like you have and are inspired to do. These are experiences of multisensory perception. But I can give you one that happened to me long before I recognized multisensory perception. My grandmother, one of my favorites, died when I was in college. And when I was at her funeral, at the funeral home, the rabbi was giving her eulogy to an audience in front of him. But off here to the right was an alcove, and that's where I was sitting with my family and all of the family. And above the alcove was a closed circuit television, so I was watching the rabbi in profile delivering the eulogy that he was giving straight on to his audience. And in those days, closed circuit TV was so new. I laughed. I never experienced that before. So let me tell you the first part of this story, and be patient. When I would come home to Kansas from Harvard, I would stop over in Kansas City and spend it with my grandmother. And we would pull out the two single beds in her pull-out living room beds. And we lie on them, each on our backs, holding hands in between, and we gossip about the family. And we just really enjoy being with each other. And while I was there, and she was living in an apartment place called Twin Oaks. And it was two large, beautiful buildings. And they were, in those days, large and beautiful. And one of them had a large restaurant. And she would take me to the restaurant. And then after that, we would go walking in the lobby, and it was an ocean of gray hair. And she would introduce me, and she'd say, Gary, you remember Mrs. and you remember Mr. This is Mr. Burl, and this is, and if I ever didn't say, hello, or if I didn't recognize the name, we were holding hands, and she'd jerk my hand down, and she'd say, shh, just like that. Well, that was Grandma. When I started laughing at her funeral, she jerked my hand down, and she said, shh.
How old were you?
I'm going to guess I was probably around 20 because I was still in college, maybe 19. maybe a year earlier, but I could never miss her. How could I miss her? She told me to stop laughing at her funeral. And I never told my parents. I never told anyone for years, maybe 20 years, because I didn't think they'd believe me. They think that I was consumed with grief the way they were. They all loved her very much. And I did too, but what's to grieve? Grandma's still grandma. So that is an experience of multisensory perception that I hope will assist your listeners and your viewers to examine their own life. Are there times when you know something that your five senses couldn't have told you, couldn't have revealed to you? There's different ways of hearing intuition. Some people can just hear voices, that's grand, but some people get a certain feeling inside. Some people stand up and listen, or they pop up, their spine gets straight, or they have goosebumps, or they hear music, or they see music and they hear color. I mean, there's no right way to enjoy intuition and to benefit from it. So this is part of this, I think there's more of the same. There's other kinds of, there's countless multisensory experiences. When I first met Linda, my spiritual partner, at a New Age retreat, I was really turned off by her. I didn't care for her. So you know what that means?
You really liked her.
Okay.
That you really liked her?
I felt I did not like this person. I was pushing her away. And I didn't know enough then to recognize that that was fear. When you push something away from you, that's fear. Or to put it in shorter language, she threatened me. I thought, how could she threaten me? Look at the way she looks. She's got a haircut that's funny. It looks like a monk's. She's barefoot. She's got sweats. I didn't realize that she's actually an elegant person who dresses in heels at the time. But I saw her at a New Age retreat. And somehow we started being put together and talking about meaningful things. And then she moved to Mount Shasta, California, where I was and where the retreat was. And I had my second experience, or another experience, when I first saw her, when she arrived with a friend and her father. I was surprised by how good I felt to see her. It just felt good. It wasn't as though we were missing her. And then we decided, we started seeing each other again and again. Sometimes this was comfortable for me and sometimes very uncomfortable, usually in the afternoons. And after about 6 months, the thought came to me, I think I'm in a relationship. But I had no way of knowing that in the past. Relationships meant to me a strong sexual attraction, a bonding, and then wondering what happened 2 or 3 months later. However, by the time I met Linda, I was a secular monk for 7 years because I was coming to terms with that. Oh, I'll give you another example of multisensory perception. Linda gives 2-minute hugs. That's just, and at the retreat we were at, I knew all of the people there. I knew a lot of them women, and I considered them all sisters, and I knew most of them men. And once Linda came up to me in the morning, and she gave me one of these 2-minute hugs. And that was exciting, if you know what I mean. You can't get a 2-minute hug if you're a man and you're excited. You keep it a secret.
Right.
But for me, suddenly I experienced with that a pain, powerful jolt of pain in my first chakra area, around the base of my spine. And it was horrible. I couldn't sit, I couldn't stand. I think I must have started to sweat, intense pain. And all of this got my attention, and I really started to think. But I didn't have to think long before I knew what was happening. When I lived in my little town in Kansas, before I went to Harvard, Pittsburgh, Kansas. Surely you've heard of it.
I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So no, I didn't know there was a Pittsburgh, Kansas.
There is, but there's no H on this one. And there was a road going straight through it, north to south. And while our family was living there, the state built a bypass around it. It looked like a crescent moon. The highway would come down, and then it would make a crescent moon around Pittsburgh, Kansas, and continue on its way. I saw, JJ, in that moment of pain and shortly after, that that's what I had tried to do with my sexuality. I had tried to make a bypass around it because it had never worked for me. I was an addict, and I knew that I'd met a teacher once I liked, not my spiritual teacher, but all of them were, he was celibate. And so I thought I'd model myself after that. He was Asian, an old Asian man. And then I realized in a second, he was celibate because it served him. It served him in serving people. I was celibate because I was frightened of my sexuality. And Linda and I then went on a walk the next day or later that afternoon, and I shared that with her. I shared it all with her. It just seemed natural. And that was the beginning of our spiritual partnership, because she told me she's never had a man to speak with her meaningfully, except on a superficial level of wanting something or using. And so that, and recognizing that we had a relationship 6 months after she moved to Mount Shasta, not because of me, she made that clear. She had planned to move, then decided not to move after she met me, and then realized, I'm not going to let my life be decided by anyone. And if I want to move there, I'm going to move there. And she did. And we're still here. We're still together now, 27 years later. So you can see how many multisensory perceptions fill your experience. Slowly at first, one here, one there, a synchronicity there, a meaningful coincidence here. And before you know it, you want to use these perceptions wisely and intelligently. And that involves creating authentic power. Authentic power is the potential that comes with multisensory perception.
You've talked about authentic power also in terms of the soul and a personality. And I want to define personality a little bit for people listening and for myself, because I won't lie, probably the unhealed parts of me heard personality. And even though on one hand, like maybe in talking with Oprah and your relationship with her and her mission and how she's able to help people, that I see that as a good thing, and that you've energetically, I felt like that was I don't want to say good or bad, but that it's authentic. I guess that's really the only word we can say. That it's authentic. It's based in love, and it's based in wanting to serve. And so when I heard that, I got a little concerned for me because of, and I'm so glad that you mentioned being a monk. It answers lots of questions because my father is a very simple, beautiful soul who is like, is very generous of heart and spirit and happy and full of joy. And I've often heard people refer to him as monk-like, and because he isn't sort of that traditional masculine man, as I think you were sort of alluding to with either the sex addiction and with motorcycles. And so I felt like there was like a divide. And I know from Kirk, I think you're a Libra, not that I need to have us talk about astrology, but understanding the dualities of our human condition and our learning and expansion and healing some of those wounds. And then again, using that to help serve others. My podcast, and I'm not going to go down that journey of how it got here, but one of the particular shows, Spirit, Purpose, and Energy, literally came out of a desire to share information with people. It was really to save my own marriage, quite honestly, not necessarily the show in its intent of talking about spirit, purpose, and energy, law of attraction, quantum physics, epigenetics, things like that, mindset and healing instead of just managing. When I put it out into the world, I did it from, I'm going to say, a selfish perspective of this is working for me. And because it's working for me, I want to share it with you. And why I say selfish, I don't think it's actually selfish, because otherwise why share it? I have to pay to put the show out. It's free for other people. So there's nothing, I'm giving it away. But because I literally took it from what was coming up for me and my learnings and my healings and how it was affecting my life, and wanting to say, hey guys, any of you out there that want this has really changed my life. I am happier. I get what I want. I identify wounds. I can work through them. I have a deeper self-acceptance. And so I'm putting it out there. But on the level of personality, I know I'm not for everyone. And so there's a passion that I have that gets interpreted in several different ways. And when I'm true to me and true to what feels coming from, again, an authentic, full of love, wanting to help, wanting to provide, wanting to help heal, wanting to uplift, wanting to unveil, if you will, for anyone who's interested. I always give a disclaimer as well that these are my points of view. And if it doesn't work for you, that's cool. No big deal. I'm not trying to offend or control anyone. But with, like what's going on right now in the world, I know that you would like to talk about this pandemic and all the things that are going on. Like there's a lot of fear going on. So sometimes when people are stuck in fear, and for whatever reason, and someone like me wants to say, hey, do this, or this is what is possible, it gets received as ego. It gets received in ways that I am not intending. So I want to talk about the role of personality in authentic power in terms of its expression in each human individual, because we're all different. Right? So we're all going to have a different personality. Or are you just meaning personality in the embodiment of this soul in the physical plane?
Both. And every personality is as unique as a snowflake. So there's a couple of things that a couple of ways that I look at the world, and I love to share them with you and our listeners. First of all, that you said there's a lot of fear out there right now. That's not new.
Right.
Fear has been a part of the human experience and is, and it's not out there. That's the big change in consciousness. It's in here. It's in you. And this means that if you want to change the fear in the world, you're squandering your energy if you're trying to change it out there. It's in you. It's in me. Then I need to change it. And also, you talked about healing wounds, moving past them. I don't look at anything as a wound. I look at painful experiences as painful experiences, but I don't consider them as damaging to me. I consider them as opportunities to grow spiritually. And this is something that was new to me, very new to me. I would think, how can someone have cancer and say, this is a good thing? How can someone have a child that dies and say, this is a good thing? How can someone's business fall apart or their marriage fall apart and say, this is a good thing? By creating authentic power, it's not as though I only create what I want. What I've discovered is I also create what I don't want. So now we have to look at what I mean by I or you. There's the soul, and then there's the personality. The personality is an instrument of the soul, a temporary one. Call it an earth suit. And it has loving and frightened parts of the personality. The loving parts, by the way, you experience as gratitude and appreciation and caring and reverence for life and patience and contentment and awe of the universe. And as you develop emotional awareness, you begin to sort those out in you. And here's the thing, you begin to realize that the outside world is not creating that pain in you. It's activating an internal dynamic in you. And that internal dynamic is creating the painful physical sensations of anger and jealousy and resentment and rage and worthlessness, self-loathing. So once you begin to see this, and this is not unique to me, there's hundreds of millions of people who are seeing this now. That's why I love talking about it, because more people are understanding. And as you begin to see that, you begin to see that your life is filled with support from the universe for you to grow spiritually. not to heal a frightened part of your personality. They're not there to heal, and you can't heal them. They're angry, they're jealous, they're vengeful, they're bitter. They look for conspiracy theories. But to be able to experience them fully, the full power, the magnetic attraction of fear, and choose to act from the healthiest part of your personality that you can while that's happening, that's creating authentic power. In that moment, that is creating authentic power. And as you do that again and again, the frightened parts of your personality, the fear-based parts, begin to lose their control over you. They still come. You still feel them. They still think their thoughts. But they begin to roll off of you like water off the feathers of a duck. They don't penetrate the way they used to. And eventually, their control over you disintegrates. That's the creation of authentic power. That's our new potential. It's not a potential for five sensory humans. They have no experiential, they have no experiences to anchor any of these things onto. And so they dismiss it. Or they simply don't understand it.
But don't we have to, okay, but can't someone move from don't we all start somewhat five sensory? Well, I shouldn't say start. Isn't there sometimes an awakening or an awareness, or like with your grandmother, like those instances that pull you out of five sensory into multisensory awareness to say, hey, the universe is bigger than I thought, or hey, reincarnation is real and we don't actually die and we're mostly non-physical. Isn't there hope for the five sensory humans to evolve and attract a contrast and a problem to create this awareness?
In short, yes, always. Multisensory perception is emerging in everyone and will emerge in millions of people and will emerge in everyone in the next several generations. This is what's remarkable. Everything is remarkable about what's happening now. Our consciousness evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, or millions if you want to, depending upon what scale you want to use. And it plodded along with the evolution of physical matter. Now, human evolution is exploding. It's happening faster than an eye blink from the perspective of evolution. And everyone is going to be multisensory. Right now is a time of transition when many of us have a foot in each world. Many people are still five sensory, and they simply don't get it. And we who are multisensory are not superior to them in any way. This is simply a temporary flow and eddy in the movement of evolution. Everyone is becoming multisensory. And that is what the seat of the soul is about. In my heart, what this podcast is about, and what everyone's life is about. So you can take these few things that I've said, and they're few, but it's the heart of it. Mm-hmm. There's no hidden stuff. This is it. Creating authentic power requires the commitment to do it. And then the tools are emotional awareness, responsible choice, which is making choices that create consequences for which you're willing to assume responsibility. And then acting on them without attachment to the outcome. So you can take that and look at the pandemic, the global protest, the same way you can look at the Holocaust or the invasion of so many lands by Genghis Khan's horsemen, hordes of them, or the Roman Empire, or Alexander from Macedonia, everyone creating an empire, the Chinese dynasties, the Japanese dynasties. You can look at them in the same way. We can now because we're multisensory, but five sensory humans couldn't at the time. Now there's a big difference. The big difference is not only are we multisensory, but along with that comes a change in everything. So we can look at the pandemic, we can look at the global protest and see them from an impersonal perspective of the soul, put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic is a miracle. Everything is a miracle. I mean, we can identify this miracle and that miracle, except in the profound sense that everything is a miracle. But truly, the coronavirus is exceptional. First of all, it's never happened before. We've had pandemics, but never one like this. Never one that touches everyone on the earth at the same time. And it sent us all home, so to speak, to be with ourselves, to be away from the mindless, robotic, habitual activities that have distracted us from our emotions, from our thoughts, and from our purpose in life. In other words, this shelter in place or quarantine is a mandated meditation, if you want to look at it that way. And from that perspective, we can see things. We can see our relationship with others. We can see our desire to be with them. We can see how love is proactive. You've got to walk to the window and wave to someone while you're in your apartment. You can't just sort of love everybody in general. You say, hey, Linda, hi. Because you might not even know her name. You just seen her walking on the street before. And of course, in New York, you're not walking on the street too much like that, but you understand my example. You've got to write an email, make a phone call, send a text. Now, in that context has come the murder of a black man by a white man, a policeman. So common, so heartbreakingly common. Why did this one murder explode into a protest around the world? First, it was a protest against police brutality. That's evident. Then it expanded, as awareness expanded, into a protest against systemic racism. Then people began to realize, well, we did the same thing with Native Americans, and we still are. We started our country with a genocide, and then moved it forward with slavery. And it became a protest against all of that, or for something different. Then, so many began to realize this goes way beyond our culture and our country. This brutality is a part of five sensory perception. It's the pursuit of external power, the ability to manipulate and to control. It's always been destructive. Every suffering, every brutality, every starvation, from the Nazis to the masochist that lives in your, or the sadist that lives in your village. All of this is the pursuit of external power. The pursuit of external power is brutality, but we never saw it that way when we were five sensory. It was a good thing. It was how we evolved. Now it prevents our evolution. So, not only did the protests spread to every major American city, it spread to Berlin and Paris and Tokyo. That's because we are multisensory. That's because we can begin to see with a more accurate perception the enormity of the movement that we are in and that is in us and that we are. And this is just the beginning. We're only 3 or 4 decades into multisensory perception. That's long enough now that there are neonates born with multisensory perception. Probably all neonates were at one time. But these are different. These are different. Everything is different now. The way they see the world, their values. When our granddaughters read The Seat of the Soul or Universal Human, I know that they're going to say, what is special about great grandpa? He's supposed to be a visionary, but there's nothing visionary in this, Mom. It's just the way the world is. Well, that's where we're going if we choose. But it's not a we choose and we get there. It's you choose. It's I choose. Because in the old consciousness, we had to get a critical mass together. We had to have the 100th monkey before all of us could hop on the ride. No one hops on this ride. Everyone is becoming multisensory. But the universe presents the potential of authentic power. And if you want it in your life, you need to create it. And that requires emotional awareness, responsible choice.
Is that what you'll be doing at the Journey to the Soul retreat?
Absolutely. Everything we do. And they're each different because the experiences that participants bring are different. Even the same participants bring very different experiences from one event to the other. And we use them, and we help them use their experiences to create authentic power. Because creating authentic power, once you understand it, you'll see there's nothing more relevant. We get people from different motivations. Some people come to see us because they're on a buffet or a smorgasbord. So they're checking out. There's mindfulness meditation, there's inner child, there's all of these modalities, or there's presence, and they're all good. They're all valuable. But I feel that creating authentic power has got more grip because it's got tools in it. But eventually the time comes when participants or students realize this is not a new age thing. This is not another method. This is my life I'm working with. This is my life I'm dealing with. And I can change it. I can change it.
Yeah.
So I would suggest, I don't give advice. Linda doesn't give advice, but I have a suggestion. Don't judge yourself by your low water mark. Judge yourself by your high water mark. As Brian Stevenson, who wrote the beautiful book Just Mercy, said, of the men he was representing on death row in Alabama, you are not the worst thing you've ever done. Well, my low water marks are when I have a power struggle, when I'm in a power struggle with Linda, when I'm jealous of one of my colleagues, or when I'm insecure, or when I'm feel depressed. My high water mark is when we're talking now, because I know that what I'm saying comes from a good place that you can test yourself and experiment with. So if I judge myself by my low water marks, I could never speak as I'm speaking now, because a frightened part of my personality would say, you hypocrite, how can you say these things when just yesterday you were experiencing that? That's the point. As you create authentic power, you can begin to distinguish between frightened parts of your personality and loving, and make the choice of which one you're going to try to do your best to align yourself with. When you're angry, when you're despairing, when you're manic, that's not coming from the unchangeable ground of your being. It's coming from a part of your personality, and you don't have to follow it. But when you're in that part, it seems like the world. It seems that's the way the world is. And you feel that way, and you feel justified in feeling that way. And you're a fundamentalist. You're a fundamentalist, you, not just a fundamentalist Hindu or a Christian or a Buddhist. You have a way of being in the world, and you want everyone else to be that way too. You are the fundamentalist. And you know what Swami Vivekananda said about fundamentalism? He said that you have to put the fun before the mental. So I try to do that too, especially when I'm a fundamentalist to me. But
how can we not be?
It also gives me compassion for people who are fundamentalists, whoever they are, or fundamentalists because of their belief system, or because of their skin color, or because of their history, or because of what they see and other people don't. And the list goes on and on. It's endless. There are many ways of experiencing fear. And if you want to change it in the world, I suggest you start with yourself, because I'm not a metaphysical person. I'm a practical person. And there's simply no other way you can change the world. The world that we inherited from 5th century humans is built out of fear. It's built on external power. And if you try to change people in it, you're pursuing external power. And that means you're adding more to the world of what it's already made of. No change happens.
Mm-hmm.
Change only happens when you can add something new, something different, something fundamentally different. That's love. And the only way you can contribute that is in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because the choices that you make that I've spoken about, choice of what? Not of deed, not of word, but of intention.
Mm-hmm.
Attention and intention is a quality of consciousness that infuses the action or the deed. And if that intention is love, you are contributing something different with your words, with your deeds. And you can see that in the humans that did that. We still know them. Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Jesus from Nazareth. That's an interesting example because he said unambiguously, unmistakably, you can do all these things that I do. Not this one or that one, not bread and wine out of stones or whatever he made it out of, or empty space and the basket kept filling, or healing people, or raising someone whose body had died. He said quite a thing there. He said quite a few things. But one of them was, you can do this too. Now, the time has come to ask, when? When are you going to start? Now's the time. We're multisensory. Now is always the time. But now our entire species is in transformation. And the coronavirus, perfect as it is a miracle. And it's given to us in all its uniqueness to help us grow spiritually. Politics means external power. You can't negotiate, win, lose, or maneuver with authentic power, with alignment of your personality with your soul, with harmony, cooperation, sharing, and reverence for life, with an ability to move through life with an empowered heart without attachment to the outcome. That's very different. So as you begin to do that, you begin to develop compassion. Has to be for yourself first. Otherwise, there's no way you're going to be compassionate about anyone else. Same thing with love. Until you can begin to love yourself, you're wasting your time trying to love anyone else. You can set affirmations, you can read scriptures, but until the love is there, you're not there.
So what are we going to do, Gary, at Journey to the Soul Retreat?
We're going to explore all of these things as deeply as you like. And I invite you all to come to it. By the way, this is the first time it's not going to be an in-person event. We had a wonderful experience of the power that's waiting us now. In our last event, which was in March, several people called to say they didn't want to come because they were concerned about the virus. And we were already in Portland, Oregon, and setting up for it. But we asked our team, what can we do? We want to bring them into the event. And our team is amazing. They went out and they bought equipment and they rented equipment. And by the time we started a day later, the people who were at home were with us remotely. And so that was good. It was interesting. But the real shocker came when everyone experienced that the emotional depth, the power of the sharing, the connectedness was not diminished, either for those who were participating remotely or for those of us who were in the hotel. That was something I never expected. But once I began to think about it, it was quite understandable to me. People think that the internet connects us. It does not. That's a 5-sensory understanding. From a multi-sensory understanding, the internet is a physical symbol a manifestation in the Earth School of our growing awareness of, as individuals in this species, of how connected we already are. If we weren't reflecting that, we wouldn't have an internet.
Good point.
Test it out for yourself. Test it out at the Journey to the Soul. It's going to be online, experiential, interactive, breakout groups, spontaneous breakout groups. So you just meet people like you would in the hall if doing it in a hotel. But there are powers, there are strengths to global interactions. To digital interactions. For example, our sound tech was just telling us, who's working on a movie before the virus shut them down, with a beautiful premise. I hope to see it on Amazon, I think. It's about two people who meet online, but it's during the time of the virus and they can't meet in person. And so because there is none of the physical interactions, there's none of the sex specifically, they get to know each other. Well, actually, that's how Linda and I met, as I mentioned earlier. So when someone shares at an online event like the Journey to the Soul is going to be, and by the way, we're building this from the ground up, from scratch, to capture the power and the potential of an interactive internet experiential gathering. So I'll give you one example. When someone shares, like we're sharing now, look at my face. Here, look at my face. You're looking right into me right now. And if I'm selling you something, you can tell. There's no mistake. If I'm in a frightened part of my personality and I'm blaming or judging you or someone else who's here with me, you can see it. You can feel it. It's that powerful. And I'm looking at you, JJ. It's the same thing. Your face is right there. Now, in an in-person event, that's wonderful too. But when someone stands up to share in a group of, well, we try to keep it down, 60 or 80 people, no matter where they are in the room, either some people are behind them. If they're turning to face Linda and me on the riser, everyone in the room is behind them. And so they can feel the energy, they can feel that person. They can't see their face. They're not 2.5 feet away from their face like we visually are, that close to one another. If this weren't the internet, I could reach out and hug you right now. And if you really
That would be very nice.
Sure, but put your beloved on the other side of this and it would be wonderful, and you can almost feel it happen. So we're playing to that. We're using that advantage consciously, and we're open to suggestions. We feel this is only going to get better and better, and that everything in our world is going to change, is changing. No one can deny that. Well, some people would like us for it to go back to the old normal. It won't. You can't unlearn something once you learn it. Once you learn that you care about people, and it feels good to care about people. Once you learn, like in the panicky times of this pandemic, once you learn that love is leaving the last package of pasta on the shelf for someone else to buy. Well, these are the most important lessons in life. They're the lessons that we were born to learn. And as we learn them, more miracles unfold. Specifically, we become able to give the gifts that we were born to give. You can't give those gifts, the gifts that your soul wants to give, while you're angry, while you're jealous, while you're caught up in the addictive sexual current. But as you create authentic power, you free yourself from those very things. And you become able to give these gifts. And that's where your fulfillment comes in. It's not just creating authentic power, creating mastery in your life. Yes, that's fulfilling and it feels wonderful. But when you start to share your love, that's what you were born to do. And you can't do it while frightened parts of your personality are preventing you. And as you create authentic power, you experience those parts and you move past their control, beyond their control.
So for those of you that want to check out Journey to the Soul Retreat, it is happening July 26th through the 30th online, and you can go to seatofthesoul.com to learn more and to register, which I absolutely would recommend everybody do. Seatofthesoul.com. If you are listening to this, again, seatofthesoul.com. I will have all the notes in the show notes, so just click the more button or to see more on the podcast, and you'll get the direct link. And of course, if you're here with us on the video, you see it on the screen. So Seat of the Soul. And again, it's called the Journey to the Soul Retreat, July 26th through the 30th.
We didn't name it that by accident.
I'm sure you did not.
we are all on that journey. And this is just a gentle reminder.
Let's talk quickly before we close the show this time around. Maybe you'll be a guest in the future. You're welcome back if you, because I know there's some more exciting news coming for you, like your own podcast, as well as a new book. So why don't you tell us a little about your newest book that's coming?
The new book is coming next year, hopefully in the spring, maybe in the summer. And it's called Universal Human. And Universal Human is our new potential as we shift from 5-sensory to multi-sensory perception is authentic power. And that's what we're doing now. That's the phase that we're all in, or we all will be in within a few generations. We communicate with non-physical guides and teachers. It's not this special thing anymore. It's always special, and everybody has that specialness. That's a part of multi-sensory perception. And we'll create new social structures, not by saying we're going to change a social structure. We can't change a social structure. Social structures are like mountains that come out of the earth. Social structures are these edifices that come out of human experience. And it's only when human experience changes that the social structures will change. And that's what's happening. Exactly. So it doesn't change the social structure of governance to shift from a representative constitutional democracy to a dictatorship or an oligarchy like we're drifting toward now. It doesn't change an economic, the social structure of economics and business to change from capitalism or to communism or to socialism. That's like mountaintop mining. It doesn't change the mountain. It's like a ski resort on a huge mountain. It doesn't change the mountain. And by the way, I'm saying that we're drifting toward oligarchy there. That's only frightened parts of personalities feel the call of that. Those who are very wealthy and don't want to lose any of it. Those who don't like themselves and they don't like other people except those who are like themselves. The contemporary term is xenophobic. They don't like immigrants. Yet, except for the Native Americans who we tried to eradicate, there isn't anyone in this country that isn't an immigrant. And that's just speaking for this country, but I want to shift to a much larger scale. We're talking about the human species now. And as we create authentic power, as we become authentically powerful, it's out of that universal humans emerge. So it won't work to put an ad on the internet for a universal human. There aren't any. So the book is dedicated to emerging universal humans. And these are people who are creating authentic power. Like I am, like you are, and like I feel so many of the people who are listening here, and eventually everyone will. And from that will come universal humans. We can't say a few words about them. We can't describe their experiences any more than a multisensory human can explain his or her experiences to a 5-sensory human. There's no possibility. The same way, a universal human would not be able to explain to a multisensory human the experience of a universal human. But we know about universal humans. We can see it. The handwriting is on the wall. Universal humans are humans whose allegiance is to life, with a capital L, by the way. Life first and everything else second. For example, I look at myself, an emerging universal human, as a potential universal human first and a male second. A universal human. My allegiance, put it this way, my allegiance is to life first and mass and male second. My allegiance is to life first and an American second. My allegiance is to life first and everything else that I thought I could be or have or want second. A universal human is a citizen of the universe, an adult citizen. 5th century humans think of themselves as children of the universe. That self-identity only limits them and makes them dependent on what? Multi-sensory humans are dependent also on the universe. Multi-sensory humans have trust in the universe. That's the only thing that's big enough to carry their trust. Universal humans are beyond nation, culture, religion, ethnic group, and gender. That's where we're all going. Not in this lifetime. I know that in this lifetime, hundreds of millions will turn into many more multi-sensory humans. And within a few human generations, billions of us, no one will not be multi-sensory, and all will have the potential of creating authentic power. Multi-sensory perception is a gift from the universe. All we need to do is unwrap it and use it. But creating authentic power is a potential. You have to create it. You have to have the courage and the commitment and the compassion and the conscious communication and action to become aware, to develop emotional awareness and experience all of your emotions in terms of physical sensations, not happy, jealous, sad, light, buoyant, but I'm feeling something in my chest area. It's like a stabbing pain. It's just to the left of center. Or I'm feeling something in my throat area. It's about the size of a golf ball and it hurts because it's constricted. Those are physical sensations. As you develop the ability to do that, and then based on that, know when fear is present because I hurt somewhere, or when love is present because I feel wonderful, and then choose love to the best of my ability. You become authentically empowered as you do that again and again and again and again. And the universe supports you again and again and again and again. And out of that, out of us, out of the human species as it becomes multisensory and authentically empowered, emerges and will emerge the first universal human, and another and another and another. That's where we're headed. This book is about universal human. It'll come out next year. And if you feel that you're an emerging universal human, or you'd like to be, it's dedicated to you.
So make sure to go to seedofthesoul.com, because I'm sure there's a place where you can sign up to get on the list, the email list, or be in touch with Gary. So when it is announced, and of course, hopefully you'll come back and we can talk about it here on the show, we can let everybody know that it's ready. But until then, stay connected. Definitely check out and go to seedofthesoul.com to register for Journey to the Soul Retreat happening July 26th through the 30th, 2020. Couldn't be a better time to do this kind of work. Thank you, Gary, for coming on the show. I hope this is not the last conversation we have, but I definitely appreciate so much that it's the first and that you took the time to be here with me today and those who are listening and watching.
You're welcome. And I accept your invitation, JJ. I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Excellent.